The coronavirus is creating anxiety and stoking fear in just about everybody. Today, we'll be talking about how to control it and how you can get your life back on this edition of The Philip Gagnon Show.
This is the #1 podcast for real estate brokers and leaders. You're listening to The Philip Gagnon Show.
Hello, welcome to The Philip Gagnon Show. I am your host, Philip Gagnon. My guest today is Mr. Tim Collins. How are you, Tim?
I'm very well, thank you, all things considered.
Absolutely. So Tim has a few different things that we're going to kind of talk about today. So Tim, you are enterprise account executive for Real Estate Webmasters. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
So real quick, what is Real Estate Webmasters and what do you do there?
So yeah, Real Estate Webmasters, business that's been around for about 15 years. We are the leader in website design, particularly with a focus on high-end custom website design. Thousands of customers all over Canada, the US, and even beyond. And yeah, we kind of started out life as an SEO company and evolved over time to now be the sort of largest in that space. We have at any given time about 150 employees. We work with clients on sort of large projects around, actually all the way from single agents up to our biggest customer is probably Century 21 in Canada with about 11,000 agents. So yeah, we span that whole ocean of people, and my role specifically is kind of working with our larger enterprise clients who often want to plug and play with different third-party applications and have a bit more complexity around integrations.
So in addition to all of that, I know you're obviously a dad. You've got 1, 2, 5. How many kids do you have again?
I have the absolute pleasure of fathering 3 children.
3, okay.
Yeah, they're all boys, so it's definitely an active house.
And I know you're definitely a fitness workout enthusiast by all of your social media posts. Big into that and have been for some time from what I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, we may get on to touch on that a little bit, but that's kind of definitely part of my story, coming from why I started talking about anxiety in the first place. But going back some years, I was kind of not living a very healthy lifestyle, drinking too much, eating too much, and being just generally out of shape, and that definitely contributed to my anxious mind back then. And so getting on I personally believe that our physical and mental health are very closely intertwined. And so when I began my journey of trying to stop freaking out and panicking and being anxious, exercise became a staple, which I've kind of continued to refine and ramp up and do to this day.
So that takes us perfectly into why we're here today and why we're having this discussion. So today is Thursday, March 19th. And the reason I specify the date is because this whole coronavirus thing seems to be fluctuating not only from day to day, but sometimes from hour to hour. And I'm not sure when everybody will get a chance to listen to this, but as of this recording, it's Thursday, March 19th, and I'm based in Orlando, Florida. So here it is 7:46 p.m. What time is it where you're at, Tim?
Yeah, it's quarter to 5. I'm on beautiful Vancouver Island in the northwest corner of Canada.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And so thanks to this wonderful intermediary of technology that has been around but is now being adapted, we're able to do this podcast and record and take advantage of being quarantined and separated by a couple thousand miles. So you've been doing a podcast independent of all of the other stuff that you've got going on in your life, which is called the Anxiety Podcast.
Yeah, that's right. So it's interesting. I was just talking about this the other day, but I started my podcast in 2015, and at the time, people said, "Oh, you're probably late to the game. You've missed the boat. Podcasts are already exploding." And since then, I've just seen podcasts continue to ascend, really continue to rise and get more and more popular. So, I think last time I checked, we've had about just over 2.2 million downloads. And probably not surprisingly, in the last month, my downloads have been off the charts. With all this going on in the world, people are looking for for somewhere to get some sort of reassurance and support. And I started doing all this stuff even before I've been at Real Estate Webmasters for about 2.5 years, and so even before that time, I was doing this and just continued because I'm just telling a story really of my life. But when I was suffering with anxiety myself, I didn't really find a great resource to find information. A lot of the resources I found out there in the world were very sort of stale and grey, and just sort of people were speaking in very quiet voices and being very serious. And so, yeah, I tried to create something which I thought wasn't out there, which was somebody who was a bit more upbeat, positive, and, talking about it in a bit more of a raw and truthful way. And so from kind of the first episode I ever did, please don't go and listen to it. But the first episode I ever did, I was probably having a panic attack making it. It was so nerve-wracking for me to do that. And so, yeah, it's been an evolution of sort of documenting my journey of going from high anxiety and stress and kind of living a life which was a bit of a lie, to incrementally making changes and doing things differently, and interviewing people along the way that I thought could add value to the audience and add value to the story. And so, yeah, it's been kind of cool, just sharing it as I go. And I have some sort of interesting thoughts and I share them with the audience, and if they resonate with people, I go into more detail. And I've done different experiments around cold showers and meditation and journaling and all sorts of stuff to really see what worked best for me.
There's so you kind of mentioned, you alluded to this, but I'll kind of dive into it for a second, is that there's so much of a stigma around mental health. And obviously anxiety is, there's obviously a physical component. There's also a mental health component. And it's great that you took this on, 5 years ago now that you've been doing this podcast. That's amazing. So what is in your mind, what is your definition of anxiety? And just before you answer that, the reason I ask, or the reason I want to dive into this, is I find that with any problem or issue, or anything that's going on, if we're able to understand it, give it a name, then we're able to sort of get a handle on it or a grip on it, and then we have a better chance of controlling it. So what is your definition of anxiety? What is it?
Yeah, I think there's a few different definitions for sure in terms of what it meant, but for me, in my experience, it's really an unreasonable amount of fear, based on something which may or may not happen in the future. So it's kind of that the classic sort of fear of the unknown, and in an anxious mind, for somebody who suffers with anxiety. And unfortunately, in today's world, lots of people are finding out what anxiety feels like for the first time. But with me, it was something which never really left me. I would get particularly anxious at certain events or certain things I had to do. Particularly public speaking back in the day was where I had one of my first epic meltdowns. And after that, it then becomes kind of an in your head game. So then after that, for me, it was sort of, well, what if other people find out, and what will people think of me? And now I can't get rid of this sort of cycle of negative thinking inside my head, where I'm chasing these thoughts around and it's not going away. So, classically, if you go into sort of the sciencey part of it, it's our amygdala, our croc brain is saying that something is a serious threat to our lives and our livelihood, etc. And it really just isn't. It really isn't quite as urgent as it's trying to tell you it is. And so, that's kind of been my experience of anxiety. And anxiety itself is natural. Short-term anxiety is beneficial. It's life preserving. It will save your life. It gets you to take action. If you're being chased by a bear, such as the ones in the neighborhood where you live, Philip, if you're getting chased by a bear, you better be anxious, and it'll make you start running faster than you've ever run in your life to survive, to endure. That's kind of how humans were designed, right? But once the bear's gone and you're now safe and you're locked in your house, and the threat has gone, it's not natural for you to continue being anxious for the days and weeks following that. It should gradually dwindle out after you calm down, and your parasympathetic nervous system calms your body down, and you can come back to a baseline. So as we see with like post-traumatic stress disorder in people who've been to war, if you've seen and experienced very difficult traumatic situations, it's often difficult to erase those memories and just reset naturally. And so yeah, and that's another example of where anxiety will persist if people have been really pushed to their limits physically and mentally, and it's hard to forget that stuff.
So when you defined anxiety, you mentioned the F word, which is fear.
Yep.
So how do you define fear? Because obviously there's a relationship. So how do you define fear, and what is the relationship to anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, fear, as it relates to anxiety, that they're closely aligned. Um, Fear in many cases, notwithstanding the current coronavirus issue, but in many cases, it's people use the acronym false evidence appearing real. So obviously, there is legitimate fear at times in our lives and in the world, but often, and for the sort of hundreds of people I've spoken to on the subject of anxiety, most of the things that people get most bent out of shape about and are most fearful of are things which are very unlikely to ever transpire or happen to them. They've essentially just become locked in a mental loop, and they can't break free from that. So, yeah, I think it's a case of really breaking things down and being practical and saying what is a legitimate fear. People have extreme phobias of flying on airplanes, but we know statistically, airplane travel is one of the safest ways to go. So you
Sure.
can you can throw statistics at somebody, but if they're deathly afraid of going on an airplane, that isn't enough to convince them to go and book their next holiday, because their brain is telling them otherwise. And so it's really breaking that loop or breaking that cycle. And furthermore, in my experience, anxiety in our lives is often the result of us being out of alignment somewhere. So if you think of the analogy of driving a car, if you neglect to put air in the tires and you don't take care of the suspension, over a long enough given amount of time, the steering wheel will start shaking. Right, for a while you can drive the car and it's fine, and there's no tread on the tires and it's all good. But eventually
Sure.
the wheels start shaking, and if you go on long enough, the car will veer into a ditch or something. It's going to force you to stop. And so, a lot of humans on the planet live their lives slightly out of alignment. That might mean they're in the wrong relationship, or they live in the wrong place, or they're doing the wrong kind of job, and seemingly everything's okay. And I think certainly, back to the coronavirus thing, I think the reason that anxiety pops its head up in this scenario is that, some of these things are old. Some of these things are fears that people have had for a long time. Or
Well, when you say some of these things are old, what are you referring to specifically?
I'm referring to the fact of like the alignment piece. So for me, today I've done, I've made a lot of changes in my life and done a lot of things to take care of myself. If I hadn't done that, in light of the coronavirus threat, just reading things on the news would be enough to tip me over the edge and put me into a very heightened state of panic. So I think the it's not a surface level thing to look at. You kind of need to look a little bit deeper. Most people, for instance, if you look at they have anxiety, the thing that's presenting itself, such as I'm afraid of public speaking, I'm afraid of flying on airplanes, I'm afraid of, I have social anxiety. If you peel back the layers on the conversation with that individual, that kind of symptomatic thing on the surface comes from something deep inside, which is, for some people, it's confidence. For some people, it's something their parents said to them when they were a child. For some people, it's because they're in a relationship which they're constantly at odds with their partner, and it gives them this heightened state of conflict all the time. And almost every time I've sat with somebody for long enough, and it can take hours, but sat with somebody for long enough and asked enough questions, the way it's coming out isn't what caused it in the first place. It's a connected thing, but it's not the origin. And the origin might be something which they hadn't considered. It might be a conversation which they've been avoiding having in their lives, which they really need to have.
So I want to go back just for a second, because you gave this example of air travel, and you give somebody statistics, but their brain is telling them that I shouldn't get on the plane because it's harmful, and just kind of apply that to today, because we've got this interesting debate, certainly in the U.S. And in other parts of the world as well. I'm not sure how it is in Canada. Of the government's doing too much, the government's not doing enough, and there's tolls both ways. So if you look statistically right now, as in terms of percentage of the population, most of the populations of any country, or every country, has not gotten this. But obviously, it's very deadly. It's very contagious, and nobody wants to be the one that causes somebody else to die. So the governments are taking actions and they're doing things, and then depending on which side of the line you're on, it's either too much or not enough. But then there's also an economic consequence that is yet to be seen as to what happens from shutting things down and whatever. So in talking about today's environment, where we kind of have some statistics, we kind of don't. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. What would you say to somebody that's feeling scared or afraid, or has a lot of anxiety around this?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting times, because this is one of the first times in my history anyway where there is a legitimate threat, right? There is a perceived or real threat out there in the world, and so that's got people worried, and people who probably never thought about anxiety before are now thinking, well, what if I get it? What if I give it to somebody? What if it upsets things for my family financially? How do I deal with all this stuff? And the reality is that it is a kind of example of anxiety, in that anxiety is definition of fear of the unknown, and we have that defined exactly in this case, which is that the government doesn't know when it's going to end. We don't know when the peak is. We can look at China and say China's had a lot less cases in the last couple of days, which is heartening, in that hopefully they've this on the other side of it, so we can kind of extrapolate that data out and apply it to our own populations. But yeah, at the same time, there is no guarantees around what the outcome is going to be, and that's difficult for people to take. My thoughts and my actions in this type of scenario goes to really a number of things. One of the things is controlling my inputs, and I talk about this all the time anyway, outside of the current sort of climate we're under. But I think definitely consuming a lot of media makes people more fearful, and I notice myself, if I have to stop myself and slap the back of my hand and say, don't look at CNN again, because there's no vaccine coming out today. It's not going to be over in a day's sort of time frame. And other people will say, well, if I'm not watching the news, I'm being negligent, I need to stay up on it. So you again have these sort of polarizing views, but for sure that my current guidance in all these things would be to severely limit the amount of time you spend listening to. So control your inputs. Where does your information come from? And this is the same thing in everyday life. As as they say, you kind of are the people you spend most time with. And so those inputs may be real people, or now news media outlets and social media. So in my case, I check it once a day. I third party hear information from other people as well, but I'm trying to limit my exposure to negative inputs. And at the moment, it's all negative coming in. The kind of other piece of it is controlling what I can control. So it's very small. I can control talking to you over the internet because I think it's beneficial. I can control reaching out to my customers and seeing how they're getting on and how I can support them. I can control how I behave and appear in front of my children, and kind of there needs to be leadership, right? Even in difficult times, we need to. I can't have in-depth discussions about the future of the human race in front of my kids, because I don't want them to have to go to those depths and kind of try and comprehend all that stuff, because they're clearly not ready for it. So for me, it's a case of controlling the inputs and just doing the next thing. What's the next thing I'm doing today after speaking to you. I'm going to go and prepare dinner and do my workout and spend time with my kids. And really, for me, it's just kind of putting one foot in front of another and trusting the process and trusting that things are going to be okay, and we're going to move forward. And the kind of second part of that conversation is that I believe, and I talked to somebody about on an interview about this the other day, but I believe the mental health fallout of this is going to be as big, if not worse, than the physical health fallout. And I don't want to understate the physical side, because obviously people are dying, people are getting sick, and it's a serious virus, and it's obviously highly contagious. Um, but all of the worry and the mental side is going to be, devastating for some people, and going to trigger anxiety and, upset people in ways that hasn't happened in their lives before. And so,
I mean, maybe there's some good that can come of this, because, as I mentioned earlier, there is such a stigma around mental health and anxiety, and maybe this will get attention from some people that maybe didn't think it was a real thing before.
yeah, I mean, I've already seen a, I don't know about a silver lining, but I've already seen a good side to this situation, which is that it is a human leveler, right? Like me and you, we're, in different countries on the opposite sides of the continent, but we're in exactly the same situation, in that we want to survive, we want to protect our families, we want to financially be prosperous in the future, we want to live our lives and die old and do great things. Um, and that's the same for everybody I speak to. And so I've seen, like, human connection wise, I feel like we have an opportunity to really reach out to other people, and even just customers I'm phoning who are real estate webmasters customers, and speaking to them and just saying, look, I'm just phoning to see how you're getting on, and if there's anything I can do to help you. And the conversations are deeper, the conversations are realer. We're not just talking about business,
Mm,
we're talking about families, we're talking about lives, and how do you
yeah.
feel today, versus, like, you know would you like to buy something. It's a
Right.
it's a different conversation, and
Sure.
I enjoy that, because I feel like I've been having those conversations through the podcast and stuff for some time, but it's nice to see the world connecting and being hopefully more unified. Like, it's not a political thing, it's not a country thing, it's a human
It's a
thing.
human thing. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
absolutely. So you mentioned, controlling your inputs. So I just want to dive into that for a second. If I'm an agent or broker, I not even my wife does this, is just sort of this reflexive, impulsive scrolling through Facebook and Instagram. I mean, how do you control that, especially if it's something that you rely on for work?
Yeah, I think if it's, I mean, there's if you're a content creator, then there's obviously, as you know, some people probably know, there's things like the Facebook feed eradicator for your Chrome browser, so you can log into Facebook and post stuff, but not see any posts of other people.
And what
Um,
is that called?
I think it's called Facebook feed eradicator, but if you Google that, there'll be a few versions. But for your Chrome, you can essentially put a little bit of software on your computer, so that when you look at Facebook, you can post and create content, but you won't see
And
any
not see
posts of other
anything and
people.
not get sucked
Right,
into all the negative speak. Huh, interesting.
right.
Okay.
So that's one of the things I would do. I mean, for me, because there are people that I do want to continue to connect with. Um, feel free on Facebook, for instance, if you're seeing some people who are just saying the sky's falling every day, unfollow them. Right, remain friends and unfollow them, and just
Sure.
take that negative component out of your newsfeed. Because listen, this is such a global thing that you're going to find out news about it anyway. You don't need somebody regurgitating or parroting bad news to you. It's not necessary.
Right, 15 times the same article.
Yeah. The other thing, which I again is a another recommendation, if you're an agent, a broker, or just a person in the world, is that your social media activity, in my mind, should always be batched. It shouldn't be spur of the moment. If you're, again, creating content because you're showing a property or you're talking about your business, then for sure, Facebook Live, Instagram Live, we know that video is fantastic. Um, but just the scrolling, it's kind of like, in the anxiety world, you obviously have health anxiety, which is when people feel like they are going to die of cancer, for instance, and they don't have cancer, they just start researching like, well, I don't feel very well. Do I have cancer? Google says, well, you could have cancer if you kind of start going down these rabbit holes, searching for information to which there's no answer. And I think in this current, again, why you date stamp this is because things are changing quite rapidly, but continuing to like look at Facebook and Instagram and just the internet as though it's going to tell you something, which is going to make you feel better. I would say it's not. And the thing that's going to make you feel better is inside you. It's not external. Nobody can give you that today. It's not available. It might be available in a month or a week or 2 months. We don't know, but it's not there at the moment. And so you're basically putting your brain on high alert to look for it. And all you're getting is negative bias. All you're seeing are things which are reinforcing the bad stuff, which is number of cases is going up, number of deaths going up, somebody in your city's got it, et cetera, et cetera. It's not, to some extent, and again, not to undermine the situation at all, but to some extent, once you know it's bad enough, you don't need to keep looking to reinforce that. You need to look for good things now. You need to look for things to preserve your mental health and in some ways kind of create a bit of a barrier between you and the outside world so that you can be there for your kids and for yourself mentally, right? Because you can't absorb bad information 24/7 and not think it has an impact on your psyche and your attitude and your output. It's just impossible. So, the people I see out there on social media doing good things are trying to think about not like, how do I find buyers and sellers in a tough market? Not that way, but more about like, what's something I can do today to make myself feel better? What's something I can do now? And that's kind of where my mind goes to, is like, I want to be healthy when this is over, so I keep going to the gym. I didn't stop going to the gym because there's a nasty virus around. I've got to keep.
Is your gym still open?
My gym's in my house, so.
Lucky you.
Yeah. I do have I do normally go to another gym as well, and I kind of built my home gym in the past, and actually recently thought, I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. I don't use it anymore, and now I'm kind of glad I've got it. Yeah.
So this notion of self-care, I know there's a lot of people that think this is sort of a hippie new age thing, but it really seems to be the antidote, if you will, or the cure even for anxiety and fear and everything that we're experiencing today. So you mentioned exercise. What are some other things that people can do to take care of themselves to kind of counteract all the negativity that's happening?
Yeah, I think exercise is absolutely, the one of the underpinning things around this. It seems in most places in the world, you can go outside for a walk as long as you stay away from crowds. So, if you have the ability to get outside in nature, it seems like such a basic, ridiculous suggestion, but it really is massive, is just to go out and, not take a phone and not listen to a podcast unless it's this one or mine.
Right.
But yeah, to shut off from the outside world and just, reconnect with nature again. That is we're primal beings. That grounds us. That gets us back to, that natural way of being. Don't listen to any external stimulus. Listen to the sounds. See how many birds you can listen to. Listen to the sound of the wind. Listen to the trees. Look far off in the distance. Those things are going to bring us down. And particularly now, if you're struggling with, getting sore thumbs scrolling through Facebook, definitely leave your phone at home. Definitely designate half an hour or 45 minutes to just go outside and be on your own, not with anybody else, just you, nothing else. And that kind of stuff, works in a big way. Outside of then physical movement, which the other end of the spectrum being like throwing around heavy weights or running on, if you've got a treadmill, or you can do, burpees in your house. It seems like there's a massive amount of fitness people who are now doing online related stuff that you can get behind in terms of exercise regimes to do. But do move every day is a staple, because getting your heart rate up is going to be good for boosting your immune system. It's going to be good for flushing out any of those, flushing out your nervous system and getting out any of that stress and kind of cobwebs from sitting around too much. and it gives you the positive endorphins. It gives you the nice brain chemicals that are going to just make you feel better. Everybody talks about the runner's high. It's a real thing. It makes you feel
Very much so. Yeah.
once you've done something. So, again, it's a tough world out there at the moment, but these are examples of things that you can control. You can control how you feel by taking positive steps towards it. And trust me, sometimes I feel like, screw this, I'm just gonna sit down and watch Netflix. But if you think about, I always think about it in terms of like, from an exercise point of view, I'm just asking you to do like one episode's worth of exercise, right? Like, People
Right.
people binge watch like 5 episodes of a show at night. I'm just saying take one of those episodes of 45 minutes or an hour and do some exercise, and then go back to Netflix again if you want. But, um, that's gonna be huge. The other thing is around nutrition. What you're putting into your body from a food point of view. Um, I've seen huge connections. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but I've seen huge connections in my anecdotal experience with people over the years in terms of what they consume diet wise to how they feel around stress and anxiety. So, you know, it goes without saying, but if you're eating fast food or things that are super high in sugar, you're more likely to have those ramp ups and ramp down of blood sugar, which is just makes people feel a bit more unstable. So, I recommend, if you have access to vegetables, get them. If you have access to meat and you like eating meat, get some of that as well. And just try and eat things which are going to fuel your body for good. Rice is a great, low cost, very clean burning carbohydrate, which doesn't come with really any bad stuff. My family and I had some of the sheets of seaweed the other day, and we made some sushi at home. The kids enjoyed that. Like, simple, you can do simple stuff and have good nutrition as well. So
That's a fun activity to do with them as well.
yeah, and so I've one of the other benefits I see out of this stuff is that maybe it'll get people cooking at home again. I love My sort of natural inclination is I love to serve people. It makes me feel good making food for other people. So I've got one of those crazy instant pot pressure cooker things, and I've been
Mhm.
making stuff in, boiled eggs in there. I make a rice pudding. I got a great rice pudding recipe if anybody wants it. But yeah, just simple things which are like, if the kids get hungry, instead of going to the cupboard and looking for cookies, give them a bowl of like nice hot rice pudding with some milk in it, like good hearty. You can do soups and bone broths and that type of stuff. So I think having some good sustenance around, and it doesn't have to be elaborate. It's things that you can. Rice is obviously shelf stable for a long time.
Right.
Actually, on the food side, because of like the recommended stay at home situation for a lot of people, this is a good time to get acquainted with your online shopping options. Lots of supermarkets in around the world will either pack your stuff and get you to pick it up, or they'll deliver it to your house. So I would start looking at those things. I've got, we put an order in the other day, and I think it's getting delivered, or we're picking it up on Sunday. But yeah, another easy way to avoid unnecessary exposure and just kind of lock things down for a bit. Yeah, get the old recipe books out. I like that stuff.
So you talked about, controlling your inputs, self-care, obviously exercise, diet is important. Any other tips or tricks or things that you've learned over the years from your guests or your own experience?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the one we haven't talked about yet, which is probably the number one contributing factor to mental health, would be sleep. Right. So, um, everybody knows if you don't sleep enough, you feel like crap. I was listening to a sleep expert recently talking about people who work shifts just have like an exponentially higher rate of all sorts of physical ailments due to their circadian rhythm being thrown off and them not sleeping enough. So, sleep hygiene is important, particularly when you're worried. It's important to do that the right way. So, just a few things to consider, or a few pointers for you. Some of these may seem obvious, but not everybody has kind of been in this situation before, right? So, your phone, again, your cell phone should never be in your bedroom, right? If you use it as your alarm clock, you should get a manual alarm clock, or you should
Old school.
put it in your kitchen and just let the alarm ring in the kitchen until it wakes you up. But having your phone a meter, some crazy statistic around how many people are within 1 meter or 3 or 4 feet of their phone 24 hours a day is too much, because especially in this current climate again of like wanting to check the news and wanting to see if it's getting better or getting worse, or check Facebook or Instagram. If your phone's like on your nightstand and you can just reach over when you go for a wee in the middle of the night and just turn it on and have a quick look, that's terrible for your sleep. It's just awful. Nothing's, you need to get your, I think like 7, 8, 9 hours is what I've always heard to be the best recommendation. I know some people tell you they can go to bed at 1 a.m. and get up at 5 a.m. That's not true. There's very, very
But it's
few.
not sustainable for sure.
Yeah, there's very, very few outliers when it comes to like sleep, and they're damaging themselves. So you need to get a lot of sleep. Ideally, you don't want to be watching or looking at screens in the hour or so before you go to sleep. So if you're not having trouble sleeping, then, fill your boots. I'd still say leave your phone out of the room. But if you're having trouble going to sleep, don't watch CNN before you go to sleep. Don't look at Facebook before you go to sleep. Get an old-fashioned book out, read a book, sit in bed and read a book and get sleepy that way, or have a conversation or play a board game or do something different. But the blue light, in terms of killing your ability to go to sleep, and melatonin and all those things is real. So if you're having trouble going to sleep, don't watch screens right before you go to sleep. In the last few nights, I mean, depending on where you are temperature wise, we've been sleeping with a window open up here in Canada, and having that nice cool feeling seems to be really good. So definitely lower room temperatures are better for sleep in terms of the depth of sleep that you can get into. So there's a few things, again, goes without saying, but I'll state the obvious. If you're drinking a lot of alcohol, your sleep's going to be crap. It's just a natural fact.
Yeah.
I've gone through stages in my anxiety where if I had caffeine, it would trigger me massively. So I just had to eradicate caffeine.
Even in the morning?
Even in the morning. Like I've had times where I could smell coffee and it would make me anxious. So don't underestimate the ability of cycling off of certain things. I can still drink tea, but I'm English, so tea is like water to me.
There's milk.
Yeah, exactly. It is the solution to most things, as my mum would say. But if you're struggling with coffee, then back off on your coffee a bit. Don't drink it in the evening.
So Tim, earlier you mentioned that you were kind of taking advantage, if I could, of this situation and using it as a time to sort of reconnect with people, and how you're seeing other people connecting with people. Does that play a role in dealing with anxiety at all?
Absolutely. I'm a massive believer in when you reach out to other people, it's a beautiful win-win scenario. So it makes you feel good to send a message. It makes other people feel extremely good to receive a message. Somebody I was talking to on my podcast the other day was talking about exactly this. And sometimes it's reaching out to people on your Facebook feed that you haven't spoken to for a while. It doesn't have to be immediate family. Maybe it's an old client. If you're a realtor, maybe it's an old customer you haven't spoken to in a long time. And not phoning them up or texting them to say, hey, are you ready to take action yet in terms of the market? But just phone them up and say, hey, current things considered, I was thinking about you. Hope you and your family are okay. So just that reaching out. I'm a huge fan of voice notes, unsurprisingly, because I do a podcast. So I love, the convenience of sending somebody a voice note through WhatsApp or through Facebook Messenger, and I can just record it and send it off into the world, and I feel good. They receive it. So reach out. My call to action for anybody listening to this is reach out to 3 people every day in your circle. And I'm not talking about nurturing your client base. In addition to that, just reach out to 3 people every day that you necessarily wouldn't normally reach out to, and your mom and your dad and your brothers and sisters and friends, but reach out to them and just say, hi, I was just thinking about you. The world's a bit crazy at the moment. Just wanted to see how you're getting on. Don't assume that everybody else has the network you have. Don't assume that everybody else is getting lots of inquiries about their well-being, because we all think about it, but nobody really does it. I would continue to leverage all that stuff. Obviously, we've got video tools now, things like Zoom or FaceTime. I'd interestingly been talking about doing a family Zoom meeting with my parents and my brother. One of my brothers is in Dubai, and I set one up the other day and jokingly said to my mum, like, it took this for us to all get on the phone together. But, there's some really cool collaborative tools where you can get like lots of people on the line together. Do it with your family, do it with your friends, invite other people to it. And I think that will be the takeaway from all of this stuff, is just a renewed human connection, albeit remotely. But we have the blessing and the luxury of the technology to talk to people, right? We don't have to write letters and put them in the post and wait 2 weeks for them to be received. We can just send somebody a message now.
Well, on that note, I think we will wrap up this podcast. You're the host of the Anxiety Podcast. Where can people find that?
Yeah, you can just go to anxietypodcast.com. That's my website, or look up The Anxiety Podcast on Apple or Google or wherever you listen to it. You'll find it there. I've done 403 episodes to date, so there's lots of stuff out there.
Wow.
If you need somebody to listen to, I'm your man.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Tim. I know I found this incredibly helpful and insightful, so I really want to thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Philip. I appreciate it.
Hopefully you found something helpful or insightful in today's episode. If so, I'd ask you if you could please leave a comment or like on Facebook, or rate us wherever you may be listening. That would really help me out, and it would help other people like yourself find the show and find these episodes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
This was the Philip Gagnon Show. Be sure to visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Philip Gagnon Show and join in on the conversation, access the show notes, and discover some fantastic bonus content. The Philip Gagnon Show.